Good morning, Jill. How are you today?
Very well. How are you doing?
Fine. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. Thank you very much for taking the time. You will be one of our presenters, one of our lecturers at the 2025 Shiatsu Summit in Vienna. And I have the pleasure now to do a brief interview with you about what you are going to present. Um, my first question would be, what is your personal connection and approach to the topic of chronic fatigue, depression, and burnout?
Um, in general, my approach to Shiatsu on the whole and to my practice is not pathological. So I'm going to be speaking much more about my experience in these cases because people come with these situations, these conditions, obviously, but my focus is very much holistic or however you want to call it these days, biopsycho, political, social, the global self. So, so yeah, that's a hard question for me to answer.
Hmm. But of course, from a holistic point of view, you're not focusing on the ailment, but maybe on the potential and the healing potential. And of course, every person is different. They all have their own story and their own way of coming into those conditions. But did you find any similarities? Anything that they sort of all got in common? Some sort of red line that they have in common?
Well, as we just mentioned before we started, I have a strong background in clean language, and that's my communication style. But I think I'm suspicious that I was invited along on this summit because I'm really into Seiki, and I've been doing Seiki for over 20 years. And Seiki is pretty much about looking for that little the flow, the health, the part of the key that is still in movement. My teacher Kishi, who you probably know, have heard lots about, and lots of people who are listening to this would probably have heard lots about him. But Kishi Sensei, he always said, even if there's only 2% of health in the person, this is what we're interested in. First, because we know they're not dead. And that's something we can build on. That's something that we can expand into the system. That's something the person can hold on to. And also, if I had to look for a symptom in relation to my work, I, especially talking about that kind of burnout that people get, the kind of burnout I know, which is, I hope it's not so drastically different, which is people who are working in really highly driven jobs, uh, working off and on in production crews and stuff like that, or people who are really highly into events and activism and really focused on getting things. And there's a real thing of you have come out of whatever formal education has given you, whatever formal society has given you, and you have followed a very individual path. And somehow that individual path is getting really blocked. And a lot of what the Seiki approach and I think the clean language approach as well is looking for is that authenticity in the person and them actually finding themselves, knowing themselves, being seen for who they really are, getting in touch with that authenticity and being able to stay on that path if it's the right one. So the results of the work I've done with people is often um especially in production work, people leaving their job and setting up another project and finding something that is a bit more fulfilling or really getting more in touch with their creativity and being more centered and less controlled by whoever's paying the money. As far as activism burnout goes, it's usually people trying to find not lose that spiritual connection with something that is so obstacularized by society because they're usually fighting. It's usually environmental or feminist activists I'm working with, and and a lot of things that go on, socio-political situations are blocking them getting ahead. So they usually feel very alone. And so, yeah, that takes me to what is the common thing for people with all of the conditions that you've grouped together for the summit is that feeling of loneliness, that feeling of not being accompanied. So I think if you're doing a practice that is really listening, such as clean language, or really listening to the key, to the field, to the body, and really trying to interact with that key field and finding where it can find its way through, then then you take away that aspect of loneliness, and that in itself is the springboard into finding their own resources, to finding their own capacity to deal with whatever's been thrown at them, to deal with whatever their insides, their past, their previous life, their the pre-divorce situation, whatever has led them into to this ultra isolation protection situation. I think tried to simplify three very big topics into something that's what maybe 15, 20 minutes. So
Yeah. But Jill, you mentioned the aspect of authenticity. Some people say it's becoming harder and harder to people for people to find like their own way, their own authentic way of living. But me personally, I have the feeling that at the moment there seems to be like some sort of liberation, especially as after the pandemic. I have a feeling a lot of people left their old jobs with the feeling of okay, if I'm not doing it now, then when will I do it? So, what do you think? What's your personal feeling about the possibility to be authentic nowadays?
I think I am I have followed I think greatly in part to my own experience receiving and practicing Seiki. I've followed a bit of a what might be considered an authentic lifestyle. I live in a straw bale house. I live off grid. I was feeding the chickens before I came in here and breaking the ice on their water butt. Uh, and I think it's half and half. I really feel there were a lot of people could do that, and I think we're very privileged
Mhm.
in the Shiatsu world. I think we are, you know, we uh, I have a bit of a thing there. The majority of people are very middle class. I don't. I come from a very working class background. And of course, I'm British, so that whole class thing still hangs in the air. I still see a lack of diversity in the shiatsu world. So I think it's easy for us to sit back and say, "Oh yeah, everything was great after the pandemic." But I think the reality is not that. I think a lot of the people I see, because I don't have a very high price in my practice, so I can see a lot of people. I work in neighborhoods. I don't work in the city centre anymore. I see a lot of people struggling and finding, and especially when we talk about these subjects of chronic fatigue and depression and things, I see a lot of people who have had a bit of hope coming out of the pandemic, and things weren't as easy when they got out of it. So I think if you're talking about authenticity, I don't think we're talking about radical lifestyle changes. I think we're just talking about being able to have the resources to deal with what you can do, what is within your grasp, but not limiting what you can do. And that's very much what I see in the results of when I work with people. You know, people little by little coming to what they really can do.
That's a very good point, right? Because oftentimes people think being authentic is means change like your whole life, and you pointed out very well. Thanks for that. That's a good point there.
I've changed my life. This is the third country I've lived in. I lived in Germany for a couple of years as well, and I've changed my life quite a few times over. But one of the most important things for me personally has been keeping a hold of who I really am.
mm,
And like many shiatsu practitioners, I got a lot of uh, trauma backup that I inherited, that I gained by myself, that I was born into, and that never goes away. So one very important thing I've learned by not living in a city centre apartment or by moving country is you can't just step away from something and leave everything behind. The other stuff is not called baggage for a reason. You know, baggage accompanies you wherever you go.
mm,
And this is what we deal with in shiatsu is uh, lightening the rucksack, you know, lightening the backpack, um, getting rid of some of that baggage so that you really can freely live your choices.
mm. So traveling lightly is something that might make it a bit easier sometimes, huh? With light luggage.
More lightly. I wouldn't say traveling lightly would be the ideal. Being able to lighten the load is, you know, for again, coming back to the topics that you've proposed, that is that is something that is a real key to most people who are in these situations, you know.
So when you're coming to Vienna, what will people be able to take away? What are you gonna convey to the participants?
So it's a total challenge, this, and I still haven't written my blurb. I still haven't written my little paragraph for your website, and it's not because I haven't sat down to write it. It's a bit of a challenge because it's not a long time, and I've also spoken a lot to Nick, who's a close friend, who was on last year's summit, Nick Pole. I was like, you know, how do you take something that's about attitude, it's about who you are as a practitioner and how you focus on the person and how you focus on the clients or your partners, the people you're accompanying. So what I'm hoping to do is do that, bring across the importance of the non-judgment of really listening, of really not just listening, really entering into an authentic dialogue with someone and bring something practical along. And Seiki is it's got a lot more traction in the last, sadly, since Kishi died. When Kishi was alive, he was often known as the bad boy of Shiatsu. And I think he was the bad boy of Shiatsu for many people because he was bringing some uncomfortable truths along.
Mhm.
Of, you know, we have kind of gone a lot into centering pathologically centered practice and occupying a role of expert and client. Some people I even hear calling the clients patients, so almost going into the medical field. And we have left a lot of that horizontality behind. But then there's another group in the last 10 years, like I say, he died about 12 years ago. There's been this kind of surge of interest because there is in society of more horizontality, which is not the same as equality, but a place where we trust the people we accompany much more in being able to to at least manage their situation, if not go into that self-healing. And that requires much more of a beginner's mind. So that's the non-practical side. The practical side, many years ago, people would go, "Oh, God's sake, I don't understand it. You just sit there and do nothing for 15 minutes, and then you touch someone miraculously in the right place, and they start moving around and not always, but frequently go into a state of natural movement, which we call katsugen, and uh, and and I don't understand it. And I've heard people come on his workshops, come on many works, take different teachers' workshops, and go, well, I've been to four and I still don't put it into practice. I've been to four and I don't know what it's about. So I'm hoping to break that myth a little bit and bring something simple, practical, that can make you understand that it's okay not to be touching someone the whole time, that it's okay to, yeah, you can't in 2.5 hours or 2 hours, however long the workshops are, you can't get people to really get in touch with that felt sense of hara that they have, that they're already using in many cases in another kind of practice, and say, "Yeah, take all the practice away and just get into that felt sense of hara and just come into a dialogue with the other person." I understand that what we're doing in Seiki is very much somatic empathy and acting on that somatic empathy, but acting on it in a way with absolutely no judgment and with naturalness. And I still really haven't said anything practical. I'm hoping that I can do some simple work to get people in touch with accompanying people in Katsugen, because that's kind of my forte in the Seiki environment. I started having natural movement from the very first weekend I studied Shiatsu, and I, Kishi used to say to me, "That's your thing. That's what you do best." I'd say I'm terribly concerned. I don't seem to get very much into the more quiet, the more. He said, "Oh, when you're older, you will, but right now, this is what you do." And so I think that's probably what I can bring of any value to people. Normalizing it is what a lot of people say when they come to my workshops is, I take something that can be a bit weird and a bit freaky and can be a bit scary sometimes, especially if you're working with people who have a seriously isolating situation, such as depression, such as chronic fatigue or fibromyalgia, myalgia, people who don't, to touch them is to feel pain. So I think if I can do something that doesn't require too much touching, which is what I usually do in my practice, if I can just lead them or hold the space for them to come into their own movement and to find their own skill, their own abilities, to their own resources, to loosen the tensions, to find the connections with the mind body connections um and process their whole situation. And I can often do that just through holding the space so that they can move by themselves, and occasionally touch them and know where to feel that connection through somatic empathy where I can touch them. So I'm hoping to be able to bring exercises or practices into the workshops, and that the people will find that normal. I think many people already have this experience. Many people will come into the summit after having now done 4 or 5 Seiki workshops at some point. This was not normal 10 or 12 years ago. Many people will be doing lots of this Kundalini freeing movement stuff, which seems to have become very popular. And I'm hoping to bring something that will completely demysticize that.
So I think that's it. Thank you very much for taking the time indeed.
Thank you very much for doing this. I think it's a great way to get people informed.
All right then. So have a nice day, Jill. Thanks very much. And see
This
you
is when my holiday starts, Wolfgang. I've got 1 week of holiday
again.
from today.
Yes. So enjoy your holiday then. Thanks a
Thank
lot.
you.
Bye bye.
Bye, 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 everyone.